The Bank of Canada is holding steady on its 2% inflation target, but Canadians and their pocketbooks are experiencing a different reality. This fall, inflation soared up to an 18-year high. So, with the federal government set to share its economic and fiscal update tomorrow, what will there be in there to take some of that pressure off your wallet? Let's ask the MPs. Rachel Bendayan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Associate Finance Minister. James Bizan is the Conservative MP for Selkirk, Interlake, and Eastman. And Daniel Blakey is the NDP's Finance Critic. Nice to see the three of you. Welcome to Power Play, and thanks for being there. Rachel Bendayan, I know you can't tell us or share with us what will be in the fiscal update tomorrow, but feel free to do so anyway. But I want to ask you, what can your government actually do, or any government, to fight inflation?
Well, thanks very much, Joyce. And yes, as you suggest, I had no intention on tonight's show to be scooping the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance's economic and fiscal update tomorrow. But of course, there are a lot of things that are important about tomorrow's update, and that is the transparency that it will provide to Canadians so that they can see where the money has been spent up until now and where we're going. Of course, we will be presenting a budget in the spring. Tomorrow is not a budget, but it is an incredibly important moment for everybody in finance. And so on this eve, let me tell you that I am very excited, and I'm sure that everybody watching is very intent on listening to the Deputy Prime Minister tomorrow at 4 p.m.
So, James Bizan, Canadians see this 2% target, but inflation is 3 times that. So what can the government do? And transparency, Rachel Bendayan talked about transparency. You have 3 days, to debate this. There's an added $40 billion that we found out today. What suggestions would you have for the government to fight inflation, if that's even possible for a government to do?
Well, we know that this is a mandate that's coming in the last minute of the 11th hour, and it really raises a question about, why is it taking the government so long to actually reconfirm the 2% inflationary target mandate by the Bank of Canada? And, in their announcement today, they finally acknowledged that the government of Canada has a responsibility in managing the inflation target along with the Bank of Canada. This is despite the fact that, the Prime Minister has said in the past that he doesn't concern himself with monetary policy. We had in the Globe and Mail today, they were talking about how Prime Minister Trudeau is not engaged at all when it comes to economic and fiscal policy of the country. He's too busy trying to cut up the economic pie rather than ensure that the economic drivers are in place to ensure that cost of living doesn't go any higher. And they also criticized, Chrystia Freeland, who spent most of the time since the election, touring around rather than concentrating on what is important to Canadians and this crisis that we're facing right now with inflation running out of control. So again, we need to make sure that as we move forward with the economic update coming tomorrow, is that we get prices under control. We make sure that the government isn't increasing payroll taxes and gas and energy taxes across this country. We know that food inflation is going to be up over $1,000 per family next year. And ultimately, we have to get this inflationary deficit spending under control and back to normal levels prior to the pandemic.
So, Mr. Blakey, what are you looking for tomorrow?
Sure. Well, of course, the biggest problem with inflation is that it is the effect that it has for people who are already financially vulnerable. So what are some of the things the government can do? Well, they can, earlier in the pandemic, they provided increases to the GIS and to the CCB, or that is the Canada Child Benefit. So they could look at making sure that things like the Canada Pension Plan are actually seeing increases that would help people who are struggling to be able to afford groceries in their budget. They could be acting on things like blind bidding, home flipping within the and foreign ownership of vacant property in the market. Those are things that they could do to help combat inflation. Today, what they decided to do was take the conservative advice on inflation targets, just as they took the conservative advice on canceling the Canada Recovery Benefit. And so, this is essentially kind of status quo that isn't working for people and taking advice from the Conservatives on economic policy. We're up in the House every day saying that they have a different approach, but it's actually not very evident in the way they're behaving as they say we're embarking on the recovery.
So we spoke to Minister Haidu about the $40 billion that will be in the fiscal update to cover compensation for First Nations children. I'd like to talk to the opposition here. Mr. Bizan, your reaction to this?
Well, we still haven't seen the details. We're looking forward to looking at that tomorrow, and this is about reconciliation. And we know for a fact that the government continue to take Indigenous children to court rather than dealing with this issue up front. So it's long overdue, but we need to see exactly how this money is going to be spent and how long is it spread out over when you look at the overall cost that they're talking about. So we'll see what comes out of the economic update tomorrow. And I just want to thank Daniel for realizing that, it is Conservatives that drive economic policy and that we have been, raising this issue of inflation for weeks now and raising it every day in question period. And it's been led by our leader, Aaron O'Toole, to make sure that we keep those inflationary targets under control so that life can be affordable for Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
Rachel, but then why don't you answer to that? Is that Conservative policy?
Absolutely not. And there's certainly no such thing as a monopoly on good policy. What we have announced today, Minister Freeland and Tiff Macklem, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, was that we are going to maintain the 2% inflationary target at the midpoint of the 1% to 3% inflation range. I think that is critical, not just for price stability, but for continuity and stability in the market generally. And it's also going to ensure that prices are as affordable as possible for Canadians. We know that there is global inflationary problems. We know that Canada actually has lower inflation than most of our OECD counterparts, but we are also very aware of the fact that Canadians are seeing an increase in prices, and that is why we reaffirmed the Bank of Canada's mandate this morning, and that is why we are presenting an economic update to Canadians tomorrow.
Yeah. Mr. Blakey, I want to go back to the $40 billion. So how do you want to see this impact the negotiations between the federal government and the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, currently underway? What is the NDP's position on that, and where would you like to see this go?
Sure. Well, quickly, I would just say one of the consequences of the Liberals following Conservative advice on the inflation target is that the projected increasing interest rates are also going to be hitting Canadians. And that's why some other places are looking at changing their central bank mandates, because they recognize that there's serious affordability issues and economic consequences to having rising interest rates. With respect to what's been announced today around First Nation settlement, again, I do think that we need to get more of the details on how it's going to work, but a couple things are important. One is whether or not this money actually also represents an end to the legal action. That put money start, but continue legal actions in court. And I think this ought to be representing an end to children to court. And on the other side, I think the other thing that has to be talked about is, a lot of these settlements come from government coming in and having a government knows best kind of colonial attitude, doing a lot of damage within communities, and then having to pay out for it later instead of resourcing Indigenous communities to be making decisions locally for home people. Resources for start to take more ownership over their collective.
I think we're having some audio issues. Daniel Blakey, I'm sorry. Rachel Bindayan, James Bizan, and Daniel Blakey, thank you so much. I think you'll probably be talking about this tomorrow after 4 o'clock when the minister tables it in the House of Commons. Thank you so much.